How many of you watched the NBA Finals this year? Oh, okay, several hands. I don't typically watch the NBA. I don't get into it as much as I do other sports, but I did this year. It was intriguing to me. The last time the Knicks won was 53 years ago. So the last time they won a championship was the year I was born. It was interesting, but it was a pretty intriguing finals. And of course, the Knicks, they pulled off the victory, 4 games to 1 against the San Antonio Spurs. And here's the thing, and some of you probably have heard this, you know all the statistics and all that, some of you, but the Spurs held the lead in the series for 72% of the time. Did you realize that? So that despite the fact that the Spurs were leading the entire series for 72% of the time, the Knicks somehow pulled off the win in the series. The Spurs, all 4 of their losses came while holding a double-digit lead, including a 29-point lead in game number 4. They still lost. The Knicks somehow pulled it off. So the Knicks, despite being down, despite losing the majority of the time, despite facing intense pressure the entire series, when things got tough, they were able to handle the pressure, right? They were able to persevere. They handled the strain. They ultimately controlled the narrative. But it was the opposite for the Spurs. Even though they were winning most of the time, as the Knicks kept the pressure on them and kept pushing, the Spurs ultimately couldn't handle the strain. They couldn't handle the pressure. Well, today as we continue in our series in John's Gospel, we'll see another example of contrasting responses to intense pressure, lots of tension. However, with a lot more on the line, a lot more at stake than just winning some basketball games. So where are we in our series? Where are we in the Gospel of John? Well, let's just briefly review. Jesus and his disciples have finished sharing the Passover meal together. Jesus has wrapped up his farewell discourse, his last words, his last teaching to his closest followers. He's wrapped up this discourse with his this incredibly powerful prayer, sometimes known as his high priestly prayer. And that's where we left off last week in John chapter 17. And now Jesus and his disciples have arrived at the Garden of Gethsemane, and so now we've arrived at John chapter 18. John chapter 18, open your Bibles if you have them, or open your Bible apps, or you can just, once again, follow along as I read. We're going to read the first 27 verses of John chapter 18. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples, crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who had betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those that you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciples, who was also known to the high priest, came back and spoke to the servant girl on duty there and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus said. I always taught in the synagogue or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. So they asked him, you aren't one of the disciples too, are you? He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. God, may your Spirit lead us, guide us as we seek to learn and to grow and to know you more. In Jesus' name, amen. So, once again, Jesus and his disciples have arrived at the Garden of Gethsemane, and apparently this was a regular hangout spot for Jesus and his disciples. Verse 2 again, now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. This was a special place for Jesus and his disciples. I've mentioned this before, but Christy and I got to take a trip to Israel several years ago with our former church, and if you has any of you ever been to Israel? No one has. If you take a trip to Israel, you'll notice something. At least this is what I noticed. On almost every single holy site, almost every single special place in the life of Jesus, the Roman Catholic Church has erected a huge church, a huge church building. And now the good thing about that is that they've preserved these special locations throughout the years. So, like, we know that there's a pretty good chance that these are the actual spots, and these special spots in the life of Jesus. So, and they've preserved it, and right here where this huge church is. On the other hand, the bad thing about it is that these sites have become overly commercialized, and they've just really it loses their reverence a little bit. At least that's my opinion. For instance, there's a church called the Church of Multiplication, and it's on the supposed hillside where Jesus fed the crowd, the multitude, the 5,000. And there, so once again, there's a church. This Church of Multiplication is right there on the hillside, and you can visit that church, and you can even visit the gift shop if you want, and you can purchase some loaves and fishes trinkets. You can purchase some holy water, anointing water. You can purchase some wooden crosses and all kinds of things. And, that's totally fine. But for me, I just would much rather just, be out in the open countryside. Just sit on the hillside with no church building there and just kind of imagine what it would have been like in Jesus' day. You can also get baptized in the Jordan River, which is kind of cool. Except there's just a huge crowd of people. And there's just long lines that are winding down to the river. And it was the coldest water I've ever been in my life. Just freezing, ice cold water. And there was some kind of like weird animal floating by. Christy pointed it out. It kind of freaked her out a little bit. But I'm glad I didn't see it beforehand. But you can get baptized there in the Jordan River, and you can, purchase some authentic water from the Jordan River if you want, and you can purchase a picture of your baptism, which I didn't even realize they were taking the pictures. And it reminded me of Cedar Point, when you're on those roller coasters, and they at some point they've strategically placed these cameras, and they take your picture, and then you can purchase the picture afterwards. Another one of those holy sites, those special sites that you can visit is, of course, the Garden of Gethsemane. And, of course, there's a huge church right there in the garden, and this church is called the Church of All Nations. And inside the church is supposedly the rock upon which Jesus prayed and sweat drops of blood. Here's a picture of the rock inside the Church of All Nations. Whether that's the rock where Jesus kneeled or not, I have no idea. But it's there, and you can walk through the church, and you can take a look at the rock, and then you can walk through to the back of the church outside into the kind of the courtyard, and where there's an olive grove, and there's just lots of olive trees there. And some of the olive trees there are over 1,000 years old, which is really cool. But once again, there's just usually huge crowds of people there. There's a gift shop you can visit if you want. And just for me, it just didn't feel very reverent. When you're in the Garden of Gethsemane, you want it to feel a little bit reverent. However, when we were there, Pastor Denny came through for us. Now, Pastor Denny was the pastor at Emmanuel. He was my pastor for a long time, and he took lots of these trips. He's led lots of these trips to the Holy Land, and so he has lots of connections. And he just happened to know the person who owned the olive grove across the street from the Garden of Gethsemane. And so he arranged for us, our group, to spend time in this private olive grove for an hour. And just our group, we got to spend some time there. We spent some time worshiping, singing together, and then we got to just walk around on our own and just spend time walking around and spend time praying. And it was probably one of my top moments, my top memories of the entire trip. Here's a couple pictures from that garden that we got to spend time in. The garden, which is right across the street from the Garden of Gethsemane. This must have been a very special place for Jesus and his disciples, because once again, Judas knew that they'd be there. And Judas probably spent some pretty intimate moments in this garden with Jesus and his disciples. And now here is Judas betraying Jesus in this very special place. Gethsemane means oil press, or place of the oil pressing. It was an olive grove, and more than likely it was the location of an olive press. And this olive pressing, this is where olives were crushed and then pressed in order to make olive oil. And this process of crushing and pressing of olives would typically happen 3 times. You'd crush the olives, and then you'd press the olives down, and then you'd press the olives a second time. You'd press the olives a third time to get the maximum amount of olive oil. Now, John doesn't tell us this, but the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they tell us that Jesus must have been there for a little while, because they were spending time there praying. At least Jesus was praying. And as Jesus prayed, he was feeling the intense pressure. The pressure of what was to come. The torture, the pain, the betrayal, the abandonment, the weight of sin upon his sinless back. He was being pressed in the place of olive pressing. And not once, not twice, but 3 times he was tempted to give in to the pressure. 3 times he pleads with the Father, "May this cup be taken from me." But then 3 times he also prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." And sometime after he was done praying, John tells us in verse 3 that Judas arrives. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Notice these were Roman soldiers, along with the religious rulers of the Jewish people. Officials of the high priests and Pharisees colluding with the powerful Roman Empire in order to arrest Jesus, an innocent man. And these very powerful Roman soldiers and these officials representing the most powerful of the religious rulers come out after Jesus with torches and lanterns and weapons. And of course, they're expecting Jesus to either flee, to take off and run, or to fight back. Jesus does neither. John says in verse 4, Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, let me pause right there. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, what would you do if you knew all that was going to happen to you? What would you do if you knew that there was a mob of people armed with weapons coming for you? I would have taken off. I would have gotten out of there. Jesus could have. He could have very easily escaped through the garden. Remember, it was evening. It was dark out, and he knew that they were coming for him. Probably very surprising to these soldiers, Jesus doesn't try to escape. He doesn't try to fight back. He very calmly comes out to greet them, to meet them. Verse 4 again, verse 4 and 5, knowing all that was going to happen, Jesus went out to them and asked, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. "I am he," Jesus said. And the really important thing that we miss here when reading in our English translations is that Jesus really didn't say, "I am he." In the Greek, Jesus simply says, "I am." Who is it that you're looking for, Jesus said? Jesus of Nazareth. I am. And of course, this is the divine name of God. Jesus is saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the God that was revealed to Moses in the burning bush. I am the God of all creation. I am the Word who was with God and was God in the very beginning. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. I am, Jesus said. Such power in the name. And not necessarily in the sound of the name or the utterance of the name or just the speaking of the name. That's not where the power lies. The power lies in the character of the one who is uttering the name. Who the name represents. The great I am. God himself. Right there, standing in front of these soldiers. And John tells us upon hearing Jesus' response, I am, the soldiers fall to the ground. Verse 6, when Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. And John doesn't really explain what's happening here, why they fall to the ground. And, I kind of like, to me, this is very comical. I picture kind of like a scene from a comedy or something. These great big powerful men with torches and weapons, and they're stumbling and they're tripping and they're knocking over each other, kind of like dominoes, and they all fall to the ground. But whether it's comic relief or they're awestruck by the power of God, these men, whether they know it or not, are face to face with God himself, and they can't stand in his presence. Verses 7 through 9. Again, he asked them, who is it that you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. The great I am willingly gives himself up, but he protects his followers. Remember, this is the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. But then there's Peter, verse 10, the very next verse. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. The servant's name was Malchus. I used to think that Peter was valiant, that he was noble in defending his Lord, and maybe that's so. But he's misguided. He's misguided in his zeal. He's acting just like the Romans. He's acting just like those Roman soldiers, those conquering Romans. He's acting just like the Pharisees and the religious rulers who've aligned themselves with worldly power. That's what worldly power looks like. Jesus came to redefine power. Peter keeps forgetting that his Lord is a very different kind of ruler. He keeps forgetting that the kingdom Jesus came to establish advances not by defeating his enemies, but by loving his enemies. Peter keeps forgetting that his kingdom is the way of the donkey, not the way of the war horse. His kingdom is the way of the towel and basin, not the way of the hammer. And these are lessons that we've all learned through the series, through the Gospel of John. These are lessons that Peter should have learned. And so then in verse 11, Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. And Matthew gives us a little bit more detail on what Jesus told Peter. In Matthew chapter 16, verses 52 and 53, Jesus said, put your sword back in its place. Jesus said to him, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. In other words, if you fight in the ways of the world, if you fight with worldly power, you'll always get worldly results. It's the same result over and over and over again. And this is the cycle. It's the cycle that the world can't seem to break. It's the cycle that the world can't seem to escape from. Jesus came to break that cycle. And Jesus continues to tell Peter, do you think I cannot call on my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? Jesus is saying to Peter, I could fight like this too. I could, if I wanted. I could fight using the violent methods of this world too. I could very easily wipe out these soldiers right now. He could have, but he didn't. Because that's not the way of his kingdom. That's worldly power. That's not true power. Verse 11, Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? What is this cup that Jesus is referring to? We've talked about this before, but I think it's been a while. Several times in the Old Testament, the metaphor cup of wrath is used to symbolize God's righteous anger, his judgment of sin. And what does this cup of wrath look like? And we see that as well throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament, especially in Paul's letter to the Romans. The wrath of God is described in this way. The wrath of God is described as God handing people over to experience the consequences of their destructive ways. God hands people over to experience the consequences of their sin. And that's the cup that Jesus doesn't want to face. It's why he prayed, may this cup be taken from me. He didn't want to drink this cup. Yet, not my will, but yours be done, he also prayed. And so he tells Peter, I have to drink this cup, which means he'll be handed over to the Romans. In fact, he's going to be handed over to all the evil principalities and powers of this dark world. He'll be handed over to experience the consequences, not of his sin, because he's sinless. He'll be handed over to experience the consequences of our sin. And what are the consequences of that sin? Death. And so instead of living by the sword and bringing death to some, he'll choose the cross instead and bring life to the world. He breaks the cycle. Verse 12, then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Jesus is taken, first of all, to Annas, the former high priest. He was kind of like the patriarch of the Jewish priestly family, and he's the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who's the current high priest. And this priestly family, is known for their wealth and their greed. They were loyal to the Roman authorities. They've aligned themselves with the empire, which has bought them their careers. It's bought them their wealth. It's bought them their powerful positions, and they're living the dream. And so it's important for them that another would-be Messiah not disrupt what they've built for themselves. It's crucial for them to stop Jesus, because if Jesus is a revolutionary Messiah, if Jesus is seeking to overthrow the Romans, then the empire is going to come down hard upon the Jewish people. And this is going to upset the apple cart. They may lose their powerful positions. They're going to lose their authority. And so that's why Caiaphas says that it would be better for one man to die for the people. It would be better for a rebellion to be squashed than for the entire Jewish people to suffer. In other words, it's better to eliminate this one troublemaker than for the entire country to suffer, including themselves, of course. And that's why Annas questions Jesus. In verse 19, it says, "Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about what? About his disciples and about his teaching." Annas is trying to gauge how big of a threat Jesus is. What has Jesus been teaching the people? How many disciples does he have? How big of a revolution is Jesus leading? And Jesus responds, verse 20, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they will know what I said." Jesus has nothing to hide. His ministry has been out in the open. It's been public. If they actually want to give him a fair trial, a proper trial, if they want to give him a legal trial, then they'll get some witnesses. And there's plenty of witnesses because Jesus' ministry has been out in public the whole time. Lots of witnesses. Verse 22. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Jesus doesn't retaliate. He remains faithful. And he remains bold. Jesus isn't caving to the pressure. He's speaking the truth. He's standing his ground in the face of worldly power. Meanwhile, Peter has been following at a distance. So back to verse 15. Simon Peter and another disciple who were following Jesus, because the disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple who was known to the high priest came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. We don't know who this other disciple is. Some people believe that it's John, the author of this gospel. We don't know that, but some other disciple brings Peter in, and the girl on duty in the courtyard of the high priest confronts Peter. Verse 17. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and the officials stood around a fire, warming themselves. And as Jesus is being interrogated, get this, as Jesus is being interrogated by the high priest, Peter is facing his own interrogation. Verse 25, "Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself, so they asked him, 'You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?' He denied it, saying, 'I am not.' One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, 'Didn't I see you with him in the garden?' And Peter denied it, and at that moment the rooster began to crow." And this is exactly what Jesus said would happen. What Jesus said would happen, happens. This is Peter the rock, right? This is Peter, the one who said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." This is Peter who just hours before declared, "I will lay down my life for you, Jesus." This is Peter who now denies even knowing his Lord. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And the way John has woven these 2 stories together in his gospel, the trial of Jesus and the denial of Peter, he's purposely contrasting the 2. And hopefully you can see that. When faced with threat, when faced with intense pressure, Jesus and Peter respond in 2 completely different ways. While Peter draws his sword to fight, Jesus turns the other cheek. While Peter adamantly denies 3 times, "I am not," Jesus boldly declares, "I am." While Peter seeks to remain in the dark, Jesus fearlessly steps out of the shadows to meet his accusers. While Peter is all about self-preservation, Jesus seeks the protection of others above himself. When Peter gives in to fear, Jesus embraces the cup, even though it's going to be hard. Facing intense pressure, threatened by the most powerful men in the world at the time, Jesus controls the narrative. He goes out to meet the mob. He faces the threat head on. He asks the questions. He speaks the truth. He doesn't retaliate. He doesn't fight back. He willingly gives himself up. And this is anything but passive. In Mark chapter 10, verse 45, Jesus said that he came to give his life as a ransom for many. And in John chapter 10, verse 18, Jesus said, "No one takes my life from me. I willingly lay it down." Who's really in charge? Jesus isn't a hapless victim here. He's in charge. He's the one who's really in control of the situation. And Jesus proves that he has the real authority here. And this is what true power looks like. This is what true power looks like. So as we conclude, I just have a few questions that I want all of us to consider. The first one's this. Under stress or facing pressure, how are you normally tempted to respond? Fight or flight, right? Do you tend to resort to fighting, to power, to dominance, to controlling the situation? Or do you tend to escape, to take off, to hide, to resort to lying, or deny the truth? What would it look like for you to respond to these situations in the way of Jesus? Facing these moments of stress and pressure in your workplace, in your school, in your neighborhood, in your home. What difference would it make to follow the example of Jesus? Second question. When have your best intentions failed in the face of social pressure, temptations, or fear? We've all, had these camp-like commitments, right? We're determined to follow Jesus in a certain way, or to do a certain thing, or to keep a certain commitment. But then later we give up and we give in when it gets hard. Even those with the greatest of intentions can succumb to fear, temptation, and pressures in this life. Just like Peter, right? But thankfully for Peter, it wasn't over for him. Peter got another chance, as we'll see here in a few weeks. But life can be hard. We all know that. Life can be full of temptations and pressures. And that's why it's so important, and we learned this lesson a few weeks ago, it's so important to abide, to remain, to cling to stay connected to Jesus. And it's just as important to abide together with other followers of Jesus who can help us when we're tempted to give in to the pressure. It's a team sport, just like basketball. And final question, and this is kind of a Father's Day question. This is a question for, but not just dads. It's a question for all men. Okay, all men here in the room. What does it look like to be a real man? What does it mean to be a man? What is masculinity? I grew up thinking that to be a man meant to be strong, meant to be tough. My dad used to always talk to me and my brother about what it meant to bear the Holiday name. To bear the name Holiday meant that we were tough and we were strong. We could take anybody in a fight. On the football field, man, no one's going to get us down. My dad's got lots of stories. I don't have as many stories as he does, but this is what it meant to be a man. And listen, I took pride in that. But is that really what it means to be a man? Is that really what masculinity looks like? Toughness, athleticism, raw power, dominance. I think that there's a crisis of masculinity today, especially in our country. Men are wondering, what does it really mean to be a man? Is this what it looks like? God has given men a variety of strengths and unique abilities, just like he's given women a variety of strengths and a variety of unique abilities. And these things vary from man to man. And these things even vary from culture to culture. But beside all of those unique and varied abilities and strengths, I can tell you exactly what masculinity looks like. It's not self-indulgent. It's self-restrained. It's not dominating others. It's looking to the interests of others above your own, especially the weak and vulnerable. It's not dominance and control. It's using your strength for the benefit of others. It's not retaliating. It's turning the other cheek. It's giving up your life and picking up your cross. It's self-sacrificial love. This is what true masculinity looks like. In fact, this is what it looks like to be truly human. This is the way God created us to be. This is what it looks like. It looks like Jesus. And this, listen, this is true power. This is true power. This is the kind of power that destroys, that breaks the cycle of worldly power. It's the way of the cross, not the way of the sword.